You may have heard professional athletes claim that the majority of their success is attributed to their mental training rather than their physical efforts. This claim has been studied and substantiated, with it being approximated that 80% of success is psychological rather than talent or skill based. Psychology in sport is a fairly new-founded study and focuses on the utilization of psychological knowledge and principles in order to allow athletes to perform at a peak level. One of the most popular psychological principles which are commonly applied to sports are the concepts of arousal and anxiety. Throughout this program, we will explore theories related to these concepts within the scope of sports psychology. We will use this information to evaluate the effectiveness of these theories on the performance of a St. Patrick's Senior College student on their final assessment of a jive performance in front of their peers in order to make judgments in the ways in which the student could have bettered their performance. Stress is the nonspecific response that the body makes to demands placed on it. These responses can both positively and negatively affect the athlete's performance depending on the quantity of the stress and whether their reaction to the stress is positive or negative. In sport, stress often affects an athlete's level of arousal, which in turn can cause an effect on the athlete's performance within their chosen sport. In sports psychology, the term arousal is used to describe an athlete's physiological and psychological response resulting from their bodily response to stimuli. Arousal can affect an athlete's performance both positively and negatively depending on the way it is expressed. On one hand, arousal can prepare an athlete for the task at hand, giving them an extra burst of energy they need to perform at their peak in a competitive environment. Alternatively, in some cases, arousal triggers the manifestation of anxiety and excess stretch which can, in turn, inhibit an athlete's performance. Anxiety is a negative emotional state with feelings of worry, nervousness, and apprehension that is associated with the activation of the body. Unlike arousal, anxiety is an entirely psychological process and is more likely to lead to a negative reaction within an athlete during a stressful situation. There are two types of anxiety which an athlete may experience at any given time: state anxiety and trait anxiety. State anxiety is the cognitive process of anxiety in the face of a stressful or high-pressure situation, whereas trait anxiety reflects an individual's own tendency to react with state anxiety in an anticipation of a stressful situation. An athlete's trait anxiety is often part of a mannerism inherited from their environment. While each athlete will to a degree experience state anxiety in a similar way, trait anxiety levels vary from person to person and heavily impact an athlete's arousal and anxiety level, which will in turn either facilitate or hinder an athlete's physical efforts. The study of the relationship between arousal, anxiety, and performance has led to the development of several theories which aim to display the ways in which stress affects an athlete's performance. One of the most widely accepted of these theories is the inverted U hypothesis. This thesis uses a graph with one axis showing an athlete's level of arousal and the other showing their level of performance in order to identify the level of arousal necessary for an athlete to perform at their peak. This is called the optimum arousal level and varies across athletes and sports. The theory essentially states that an athlete, in this case a gymnast, whose arousal level is too low, will perform at an unsatisfactory level, as a gymnast is not psyched up enough to complete the skill. On the opposite end of the scale, a gymnast whose arousal level has surpassed the optimal level will see a decline in their performance due to a higher anxiety level in relation to the skill. In the case of both the under- and over-aroused gymnast, techniques such as visualization, especially with aids that involve multiple senses and slowing down the individual actions, would aid them in reaching and maintaining their ideal level of arousal in relation to the skill. The inverted U hypothesis recognizes the link between arousal and performance and posits that there is a medium amount of arousal and anxiety that causes one to perform higher. What did you do during this time to bring yourself to and maintain an optimum level of arousal? Talk us through your final performance. How do you think your arousal and anxiety levels affected you? What would you do differently in order to rectify these errors? And most influential during the final performance. So Megan, How much of an impact do you think your arousal and anxiety levels had on your overall success during the term?
I think that both my arousal and anxiety levels largely affected my success as well as my enjoyment throughout the term. Choosing a partner was a source of stress for me, as I was concerned about working with people I don't know all that well. Although I got over this fear early on during the term, the fact that I was working with people who I wouldn't ordinarily associate with led me to not enjoying the forming and practicing part of the term as much as I thought I would if I were working with people I already knew. This means that for the majority of the term I was either overly anxious or under-aroused due to the circumstances outside of my control, and this most likely inhibited my input and performance during these stages.
What did you do during this time to bring yourself to and maintain an optimum level of arousal?
I consistently reminded myself that this is an assessment. I tend to have a high level of trait anxiety already, so the addition of extra state anxiety due to the performance caused a negative impact on my arousal, most evidently in the dress rehearsal. This fact both lowered my state anxiety and kept my arousal at an optimum level because it reminded me that I would not be in the situation forever and I had an end goal that I was excited to achieve. There were times throughout the term where the pressure of having to learn and perform a drive routine in such a small amount of time got to me, but in all I think I handled the pressure well and kept my arousal at an appropriate level when it counted.
Talk us through your final performance. How do you think your arousal and anxiety levels affected you?
Fortunately, due to my involvement in performance sports such as gymnastics, I don't really get nervous in front of crowds. I've learned through a lifetime of competing in multiple sports the ways in which I ensure my arousal reaches and stays at an optimum level. I do this by talking to the people around me in order to distract myself from the task at hand before I'm actually on stage performing. This stops me from overthinking the performance before it even begins. When we took our place at the start of the performance, my arousal level was a little higher than I would usually consider my optimum level, which caused some mild pre-performance jitters. The stimulus of needing to concentrate more on remembering the steps of this portion of the routine increased my arousal level and led to me being over-aroused, which caused the standard of my performance to be less than my best.
What would you do differently in order to rectify these errors?
Make sure I'm more involved during the choreographing process of the routine, so that I know the routine will be finished in an appropriate time. I would then practice my routine more often in the lead up to the performance to ensure that I know the dance inside and out. This would ensure that I would have less to worry about going into the performance and would enhance my performance by preventing my arousal for going over the optimum level midway through the routine.
Throughout this video, we have explored the sporting psychological principles of arousal, anxiety, and stress, and the inverted U hypothesis and how they affect an athlete's levels of performance at any given time. We also use the example of students' drive assessments to evaluate the effects of these concepts on a performance and make recommendations on how to use these concepts to further enhance a student's performances. In the words of American professional baseball player Babe Ruth, "It's hard to beat a person who never gives up."